The older we get, the more likely we find ourselves becoming accidental historians. If you're healthy enough to remember the past, there's a good chance that someone who's younger will ask you questions. But some older residents of Boston are taking these efforts to another level thanks to free courses in writing memoirs offered by the Mayor's Elderly Commission and Grub Street. The next course for residents of the West End and Beacon Hill will begin September 12th. To tell us about the ongoing project are one of the earlier participants from the South End, Judith Klau, and from the Commission, the Deputy Commissioner, Tula Mahl. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome. We're so happy to be here.
I want to start with Judith Klau. Talk about how did you get into this and what kept you going?
Into the memoir project?
Yes.
Tula called and said there was a memoir project, and that you just hear, and that there would be tutors from Grub Street. And as a person who had always thought she could be a writer, I thought, what a fabulous opportunity. I am not a writer, and part of the wonderful experience showed me that I like memoir very much as a genre, but all that dream of being a writer, it's very hard work.
Well, you talk about the beginning of the work, because some people have these dreams and they never take a single step forward until someone accidentally gives them a nudge. I guess you got this nudge.
I got the nudge, and I really, it was an experience in which, Tula, are you going to describe how it works?
Yeah, I would love to describe how it works.
Because then
ready.
You can find out how I got nudged.
Well, Tula, I guess this works for people who've had this dream for many years of being a writer. But what if you haven't had the dream? You're just somebody who remembers stuff.
Well, it's for everyone. It's not just for those who want to write. I mean, that's how I pitch it when I'm trying to recruit, which is what I'm doing now, recruiting people for a neighborhood workshop. You don't have to have any experience. All we ask is that you have life experience, which everyone does, and of course our wonderful folks living in our neighborhoods who've lived in the neighborhoods or come from other places, and they have that life experience, and that you can document it for yourself, so we don't have anyone, you know, taking notes for you or writing your own stuff. And so that's all we ask. That's all they need to be. They need to be over the age of 60, and they need to be able to write for themselves and participate in the group, because there is a group dynamic that happens. So.
Judith, what about the group? Because you're doing this, at least part of it, with other people.
Right. Well, the way it works is when I say that I wanted to be a writer, this was what intrigued me, was the way the group worked. We had a mentor from Grub Street who came and gave us writing prompts. And the first prompt she gave us was, "My mother never." Well, you can imagine that opens the gates very wide when you think about all the things your mother never. My mother never fastened the garters in the back of her corset. So from that point on, it was just flying. Memoirs not only about, and the group were people from every kind of person from the South End, people who had lived there for a long time, but also people who had come there from the South to escape segregation, people who had had various experiences in life, mostly women.
Yeah.
We had one man who's a neighbor of mine, lives in St. Helena's house, and he wrote about loving Frank Sinatra. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just my mother's garters. Part of the joy of it was learning about what your neighbors remembered about their own lives, and how the tutor from Grub Street brought that out in various ways.
So it's like about building community, really. I mean, that's really what the Elderly Commission wants to do. And this is just one way. So yes, we're teaching older adults how to write their own memoirs. And the purpose for that is so we can retain that history. But there's also, you have neighbors that you don't know. And this is an opportunity for people to talk to each other and get to know each other without, it's so relaxed because you write. So, my mother never, and there was another woman who wrote about her mother and how her mother had a lot of secrets. And then another woman who had a very sad story, but then they share these stories. So there's a little bit of nostalgia that they talk about, and then they start remembering, oh, do you remember there was a corner store? Or things like that come up. So the group becomes very cohesive and they become friends. We've had groups that, to this day, meet on the summer for this big party because they just build such great relationships.
What's the use of those kinds of relationships? I mean, there are middle-aged people who do this on Facebook, and their spouses say, "Oh, get a life," you know. But what about when you're older? Why is it important to do this kind of thing?
Well, it's important because as people get older, their friends and families die or move away, and so they become more isolated. And so to build community, so to make new connections, to keep people from being isolated. And this is just one of the many ways the Elderly Commission does that. We also offer events throughout the city that we invite older adults to these events, but this isn't just here's an event to show up at and enjoy. You're really building a relationship with your neighbor, with the person next to you, and then you're also documenting these stories. So I feel, and I mean, Judith, you can speak to this, people take these stories, and this is the first time maybe a grandchild has heard the story. And although we only publish one of the stories, so this is the book that ends up being published. The book that she's in is being published as we speak. She'll get her copy at the end of the year. But then the authors, they become published authors, end up giving these books to friends and families, grandchildren. These books have been shipped like across country to aunts and uncles in California. So there's a real sense of learning and ownership and history. I don't know. I can't even stop talking about it. I love it.
Reactions you got to either the book or the work that you've done. Have anybody?
Well, it was interesting because people were writing by hand, but I brought my computer and I was writing on the computer, so I was going very fast. So that meant that I could produce a lot. So I went from prompt to prompt and did most of them. And we had lunch. I forgot to say that. Yeah. And that was a very good part too, because then you really got to be with people and chat with them. And what happened was it made me recall things that I had forgotten, and it also made me put them in order. And the way the program works is that after 3 or 4 weeks working as a group, we were assigned individual tutors from Grub Street who work with you on the one piece that you think you're going to offer for publication. And they did that final editing. And it was wonderful to be with a professional and to really feel very special. It was a wonderfully special feeling that someone really intently looked at your work and gave you feedback on it. And it was I have become, since that time, I've become a kind of blogger. I don't go on the blogosphere, but when I go somewhere now, I make a lot of notes that I send to my kids. And in the past, I thought they weren't interested, and it turns out they're very interested.
What about that feeling? You said you remember some things that you thought you had forgotten.
Yes.
What was that like when you stumbled upon it again?
Well, it was really quite wonderful because the piece that's going to be published is about my father. And I remembered all these really quirky and strange interactions that I'd had with my father that made him sound, in a sense, as I was writing and reading to the group, it made him sound like a not particularly caring father, but in fact, he was a magnificent father. And what that reminded me of, what that helped me think about, was my own role as a parent. I did a lot of quirky and difficult things with my children, but in the main, looking back on it, I'm so aware of how much my father loved me and how much I loved him, and I'm hoping that my children will have the same reaction. What you remember, what you have, I think, in memory is a broad overview, and when you write, you bring to that overview the details that created the memory.
And that's part of the workshop. That's part of what the coaches are there to do. That's their expertise. Is you write, there's a prompt, and so you write a little bit about that, but they ask you, and then they share the stories. They ask you, tell me more about that. And so, like Judith was saying, so the first 4 weeks you meet in a group and everyone writes and talks. It's building content. Then the next 4 weeks you're divided to meet individually with an individual coach who really will help you pull out the details that in your head you're like, oh, I know what my grandfather was wearing, I know what he looked like. But to a reader, they don't know, and so it teaches you those skills, which people don't. If you're not a writer, you're not thinking about the audience. And so I think that I get that reaction a lot from people, like, I never thought to remember these things, and all these memories came rushing back. And they really enjoyed that.
Well, I have to ask each of you to give out some information so people can remember what to do next. And I want to start with Judith, because one of the offshoots here is the Geezers. This is a group of people who get together. So I suppose if you're in the South End and you're into this kind of thing, what should they do?
They should come to Haley House on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock and meet other geezers, other people in the South End who have interesting experiences and interesting opinions. And especially with the mayoral race coming up, many people in the group are very interested and very close followers of what goes on. And so it's an informal discussion group. Sometimes I get up on Tuesday morning, I think, oh, I'm not going to go, there won't be anybody there. And there are always 30 people there. And I've met lots of nice people that way too. So it's a great introduction.
And Tula, if anybody wants to join this next stage here in Beacon Hill in the West End at the Athenaeum, what's the best way to move on with that?
So the best way is, so there is a deadline because we will be starting in September. So as soon as people can call us, that would be best. So you can call the Elderly Commission at 617-635-4366, or they can call Greg Jocelyn directly, who is managing the program, at 617-635-4250.
All right, thank you very, very much, Tula Mahl and Judith Klau.